the Education Lounge podcast.
So there are over 4,000 secondary schools in England, I believe. Not the whole of UK, only England. And there are only 163 grammar schools out of those 4,000. And to go into a grammar school, you need to have passed your 11 plus. Now that was set up, that system was set up in the 1950s when they brought in this whole new education system and the changes they brought in, because they wanted to bring in effectively streaming. So what it was, if you put it into context about what life was like in the 50s, you know, you had a lot, it was an expanding economy. You had plenty of factories and obviously a booming economy where they needed factory workers and they needed managers for those factory workers and they needed senior staff. So what it was actually suggested by, I forget the name of the psychologist, but it was suggested by a psychologist, I believe, social psychologist, I think he was, that you couldn't really teach intelligence. That was the thinking at that time. And so the schools were effectively set up so that you had a proportion of children who would effectively be academic and go to grammar schools, and to be and really it would be those children who would then go on to universities, get their degrees and become engineers and doctors and all the rest of it. And then you had comprehensives came a lot later, but then you had the technical colleges and the non-academic, where children would often leave, I think, by the age of 16 and go on to do apprenticeships. So you'd get that stream of workers who are plumbers and electricians and tradesmen, really. And then there was yet another stream which died very, very quickly. Now, the interesting thing is they then, the BBC did a really brilliant series on this about how the school system has evolved from Victorian times, really, to the early 2000s, I think it was. And what they looked at was that they'd go into a classroom and set up a classroom and actually film what happened in that classroom. So not only did you have this tripartite system, but what they did within that system was you had the grammar school children would be tested. In the majority of cases, they'd be tested, but there were some schools where you didn't actually have to take the test. So, for example, personal example, I came into this country in 1972. And so the majority of my in fact, all of my secondary education was done in this country. Now, the first 2 years I spent in one of the biggest comprehensive schools in South London, Catford. And then we moved to Kent. And the teachers' report, the teachers' report went to the local council. And I think I had to sit a mini test. I vaguely remember sitting something, but the weight was mostly on the teacher's recommendation as to, well, she's quite academic. I'm assuming this is what it said. She's quite academic, so she'd be better off in a grammar school than the local comp. And so the council automatically put me into a grammar school. And the jump from the work that we did, the jump from the comprehensive to the grammar was massive. Now, I joined in year 8, I want to say. Yes, because the first 2 years were at Catford Girls, and then we moved house. So year 9 even. I must have joined in year 9 because they put me in the Latin class. Even within the grammar school, the classes were split into different languages. They put me in the Latin class but said, you're too late to take Latin. So instead, you can try out Italian and you can try out German. Well, I didn't get on with German at all, but I did get on really well with Italian. And they were really good. They gave me sort of one-to-one lessons for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very. This is a very personal experience as to the difference between the comprehensive school and the grammar school. So grammar schools technically, to go back to the point, existed to prepare children for a particular type of role and a particular type of job that needed a lot more sort of academics than the non-grammar schools. And so that's why the 11 plus was set up.
So what is the 11 plus today then?
Well, what's your experience of it? And then I'll tell you what I think what the 11 plus is today.
What
As a tutor, what is your experience of it? Both
pressure.
of you. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
I think, it's well, first of all, it is different to if you go to a grammar school and you compare it to a comprehensive. It's extremely different because they select the top. It's like 5 to 10%.
Yeah, they use bell curve to select.
Yeah. So you've got obviously if you've got more able children generally in the class, that tends to put up the standard overall within the school, and then it means the teachers don't have as wide a range of ability to teach to. So it means that they can do more advanced work earlier on. So if you were a bright student who went to a state school, you might find that your school experience is sort of less. It doesn't push you enough. We've had quite a few students who've like very, very intelligent state school children, and they've gone to a state school and they haven't really been pushed that much. Whereas, if you go to a grammar school, then you're more likely to be pushed.
Well, there's 2 points there. It's interesting that you say that. There's 2 points there. It's partly why we teach the way we teach in our centres. We teach in small groups because the cohort that the child is working with makes a big difference. There is, every child has an innate competitiveness. And I know we don't push it, but it's there and you can see it. And it definitely makes a difference working as a small group. And so if you're then thinking the more academic children are pulled away into a grammar school, does that mean that because they're in a group of children that are very similar to them academically, that they will get better results than if they're in a mixed comprehensive where they are there are maybe 2 or 3 children who are at the top end, and then you've got other children who've got all sorts of issues, and the teacher is having to deal with all of that. I was talking to a parent last week who is a teacher, and it was a general conversation, and she brought it up, and she said, in their school, I don't know what school it is, but in their school, they get told off if they focus on pushing the brighter children. The aim is to bring the bottom up. And I mean, reading between the lines, I'm assuming that means that if you're a bright child, you're basically left to your own devices. So,
well, I'd say there's 2 neglected groups in school that stand out, and those are
both extremes.
Yeah, both extremes. So you get the ones who just cannot keep up because it's moving too fast, because you're catering to the middle, you're catering to the majority.
yeah.
Although, to be honest, they've got more learning support and stuff like that. And then you've got the ones at the top end who never seem to, well, the teacher would never say at like a parents' evening or something like that, oh, your child could be pushed in this direction and stuff like that.
They will never say
They'll
that.
say, no, they're doing fine. They're
Yes.
meeting.
They've exceeded expectations right. So we've done our job, basically.
So that's what you find is a lot of the time people come to us because of those 2 reasons. So people falling behind, and also, which is one extreme, and then you've got the other extreme. They're not being pushed enough or they're a bit bored in school.
Yes.
That was definitely the case with me.
Yes.
In primary school, because I went to a state primary school, and it was only because I went to Forest, which is, it's not exactly the same as a grammar school, but it is selective and fee paying. So you do get I did find the jump pretty big. So I felt I was behind for a long period of time, having been at the top in my previous school.
I had exactly the same experience, but with comprehensive to grammar rather than state private to independent secondary. But I had exactly the same experience, and I really struggled all the way through just to keep up.
Yeah, I was in set 3 for maths, and well, there were 4 sets. I was in set 3 for maths, and it took me till 6th form to get to top set.
But by all accounts, the maths teacher that you then had, I don't know whether he's still there, I don't even remember his name, but we were having a conversation recently about this, but the maths teacher you had was not the pushiest, or the, he basically...
I think that was Project.
Oh, okay.
Might have been both. They were different.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I had really good maths teachers.
Oh, did you?
I've got to say they're all excellent.
Mine weren't.
Yeah, like
Some of the ones I was in.
That's part of the reason why I managed to do well, is because they understood what I needed to work on. So with grammar schools, though, I don't think, what I've heard from, so our maths teacher went to a grammar school, and
we've had several tutors who've gone to grammar schools.
Yeah, we've had quite a few tutors, and they haven't liked, at least the one in Redbridge, so Ilford County, their experience of it was interesting, because they'd say like the students, it wasn't a necessarily nurturing environment.
No, it's not at all.
But it is competitive. So
it's ridiculously competitive.
Yeah, no. In this area, the Redbridge area, there's only 2 grammar schools.
Boys and girls separate. And
you've got Woodford County and Ilford County. But then in some areas, you've got, if anything, a glut of grammar schools. But even then, there's still not that many.
Yeah.
So Kent has a quarter of all grammar schools are in Kent.
Is that 20? It's like 26 or something like that.
It's more than that, I think.
Is it? there's so many in Kent, but then it's that's why they call it a postcode lottery, isn't it? So if you choose to move to a certain place and you're within catchment of loads of different grammar schools, so catchment is the selective area, you've just got a much better chance of your child getting into a grammar school because it's less competitive. It's still competitive no matter where you are. But
I mean, Redbridge say they do. I've never known a child out of catchment to get in.
They know technically they do, but because they need so many refusals from people within catchment, no one in practical terms gets in. So yeah, we've had a few people from outside catchment who've passed, but then because they're outside catchment anyway, or just like it could be
like a road.
It could be a road, or it could be. We
had one parent, if you remember, if they were on. So the boundary went through the middle of the road, and they were on the wrong side of the road.
Oh yeah, because you sometimes get the different postcodes.
Yes.
Well,
So, with all of this, why what's the benefit of putting your child through
the 11 plus program?
Yeah.
Or into grammar schools?
Well, both. Yeah.
Okay.
Why would you prepare your child for it? Yeah.
Okay, so again, it's an anecdotal. Well, it's not anecdotal. We get this all the time. Again, the same parent I was talking to, when her daughter started with us in year 4, we've been working with her for maybe 6 months now. She really, really, really struggled in maths. Compared to the rest of the children, she's still not overly confident in her maths. She still probably comes near the bottom of the group. But now she goes into school and she says, when they give her work, she says, I've done this, I know how to do this, I'm bored with this. And she achieves the marks in school. So the benefit of working through the 11 plus program is not just, my child has or has not passed the 11 plus. It filters all the way through into various areas. It's not just about academic, it's also confidence.
So yeah, that's true in terms of the course that we run. We always say that performing in school should be the first thing, and 11 plus should be like a bonus. But for those people why would you put them, apart from like obviously becoming better at the different subjects, what is the benefit of taking the 11 plus exam and trying to get into a...
So for the children that generally get into grammar schools, something, it's in the 80s or 90s that go on to universities, 80 or 90% that go on to university. Whereas in state schools, this was an article written by, I want to say, The Guardian about 2 years ago. In state school, it was something like 46, I want to say, %, but it was in the 40s that went on to university. Now, university is not the be-all and end-all. The problem is that the majority of companies ask for a degree.
Yeah.
And so it's to secure your chances, really, for a better job and a better paid job at the end of the day.
But I would argue that it's not the grammar school that does that. I think it's the selective. It's like it's a bit like the Harvard argument. So why would you go to Harvard? It's because they select. Jordan Peterson was talking about this. What the advantage of going to Harvard isn't the education you receive. It's the fact that you've been to Harvard. Because you've already been pre-selected, and if you go to Harvard, you're already very clever.
Yes.
So companies can look at that and go, oh, they've been to Harvard, so they must be quite intelligent. And there must be some kind of advantage
But
to
there-
that in
but-
regards to grammar school.
Some kind of advantage, but employers aren't going to look and say, "Oh, he or she went to grammar school."
And thus they can do the job. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
they're going to look at the
then
university.
but then it's within the child's ability to get in. So they've got some level of competence that
But you see, I completely agree with you. But that competence is not a natural competence, which is what the 11 plus was originally set up for. It was never set up.
I think it's both. Like, as in, there is an element, because intelligence is hereditary.
Yes, and there's a
Knowledge isn't.
yes, and within intelligence, they say that you can only deviate something like 10%
Yes.
either side.
Yeah. You can only the education received can only make about 10% difference either side. So if you have a lack of it, it won't. If you have a lack of knowledge, then it doesn't actually affect your intelligence level. It just
No, it doesn't.
It just means that you will appear less intelligent.
And also, with the 11 plus, when the exams were originally set up, they were set up in the context, or quite rightly, in the context of an English 1950s lifestyle, a middle class lifestyle. So some of the words that were used, some of the types of questions they were asking. Who in the middle of London wants to know what baby swan is called?
Yeah.
They don't. How relevant is it? It's general knowledge,
Yeah.
but it's not relevant.
Certainly not the tradesperson who.
Well, exactly.
Well, then they've done a study. I think they don't know who, but someone did a study using sort of on blue collar workers and white collar workers, and it was just the level of lexis or vocabulary
Yes.
that people receive, whether their children receive every day. And I think the difference was like 800 words a day difference.
I'm not surprised at that at all.
In terms of what the child is exposed to. So it's kind of, it sort of is a bit classist. It's extremely classist, actually.
Yeah, it is. It is very much.
And then something that I've always found is the one of the biggest issues that you have in preparing a child, no matter how intelligent they are, is their level of vocabulary.
Which is more difficult when you have children from like immigrant
Ethnic
families
background, yeah.
and where they don't even speak English at home, and then they bring them here
Yeah.
and expect us to teach them
Yes.
from that level up to what you're talking about.
Because it's about a literacy level, and literacy levels I don't think are purely determined I think they're mainly determined by your environment. Things like that's why they put in those other components like non-verbal reasoning, but
you see, when they originally set up that exam, they said, "Oh, this is not teachable. This is innate intelligence," which has since been proven wrong.
Can we haven't actually spoken about that. Can we run through the different components?
maybe the different boards as well.
Yeah,
So-
well, let's start with the different components of the exam, and then we can talk about what the different boards.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
So you mentioned non-verbal.
so there are 4 components basically:
Yeah.
maths, English, verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning. And this is traditionally how they were set up. So verbal reasoning, by the sheer name, is making sense of or decoding in some way, shape or form using words.
So they're
So-
like logic
Yes.
type questions.
Spotting
But
patterns
logic
and-
using words mostly, and maybe a bit of maths.
Well, and letters, individual letters, rather
Yes.
than it's not always just words. They've got
Yeah.
letters as well.
Yeah,
letter
and
patterns.
I
and things.
think they they drew some of this out of, the how the spies worked in the Second World War.
Decoding.
Yeah, there was
decoding.
there's one behind me somewhere. Where is it? There.
If the code drawn is CPXSI,
XSI.
what is the code for exist? Okay, yeah.
So if you're working from words to code, you're going to go from D to C, R to P, and copy that pattern across to find.
Yes.
And sometimes you've got to work backwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was verbal reasoning.
So ciphers and stuff like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
And non-verbal reasoning is really dealing with
It's diagrammatical.
diagrammatical and
Shapes.
sort of shapes and their movements and their layering and their colouring and their
So, like-
positioning, that sort of thing.
So it uses things like symmetry and
Yes.
rotational symmetry, number of sides, but then we've also got the 3D non-verbal, so that's all two-dimensional. And then was it 2016, roughly,
Yes.
when CEM, we'll talk about in a minute, brought out a new type of non-verbal.
With plans and elevations, you mean?
Yeah, cubes and
Yeah. So
3D.
So
shapes.
that's so non-verbal is really mathematically based, even though there are no numbers there.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, non-verbal is mathematically based in terms of how you think, and verbal is kind of a mixture of maths and English.
But it's predominantly English.
But the way you have to think is mathematical.
Yes, absolutely. You have to be logical. You have to be orderly.
Yeah. I mean, generally, you there are exceptions, but if they're good at maths problems, then they will have a bit more
non-verbal skills.
They will have some more aptitude for the non-verbal.
Yes.
Is what you find.
Yeah.
But it's not always the case, though.
No, it's not. So they're the four components that make up the 11 plus, and depending on who sets the exam will depend on how it's done. So, for example, traditionally it was a company called NFER, the National Federation Foundation of Education, something or other, research.
Yeah.
Which was then taken over by GL. I've got no idea what GL stands for. Granada Learning,
Yeah, that was
I want to say. And so traditionally what they did was you'd get one full paper of X number of questions, usually something like 79, 80 questions.
On
sometimes
one
100
subject?
On one subject. So you'd have
A maths paper.
an English paper that would include grammar, punctuation, understanding, so comprehension, but no writing. Now, we'll come to that in a minute as to why no writing.
Then you'd also...
Then you've got the verbal,
yeah.
a mixture of the style of questions, and the same with non-verbal. Kent use a modified version of that now.
So what's that? So this is the exam board, isn't it?
This is the borough.
So what?
So the exam boards are as follows. Let's make it very
you
clear.
started with Kent. So Kent.
Yeah. So Kent. So normally what happens is council issues out a contract to a company that lasts X number of years, and what used to happen was every council used GL. So it was quite straightforward, nothing very complicated. But then you got breakouts, and Buckinghamshire. I want to say Buckinghamshire used to use only maths and verbal reasoning, and what they found was the majority of children that actually passed the 11 plus near enough scored 100% on their verbal reasoning, because it was practiced so much. Because what GL, I don't know whether this is how they still do it, I'm assuming they do, they have a bank of questions and they pull out from the bank of questions. So, over the years, every question has been seen.
Yeah.
And so what they found was that most children were achieving nigh on 100% on their verbal reasoning paper. And so the only criteria was your boundaries, where you lived, your catchment, and how good you were at maths. So then CEM came along. CEM has now been bought out by somebody else, but it was University of Durham that set this up.
And why was that introduced?
Because they wanted to make it tutor proof.
Yeah.
They wanted to increase social mobility to some extent. Well,
that was that's always been the argument anyway.
Yeah, but they thought the core skills of maths and English are too easy to teach, and thus if you have access to expensive tutors and things like that, then you've got some kind of a big advantage. So they wanted to bring in more like non-verbal and
That's it.
Something
skills.
that's hard. It was
Harder to teach.
harder to teach, but not impossible. Like,
So if you then compare the borough of Kent still do use GL, although they've modified to work similarly to the CM paper.
they've brought in a few things from CM into
exactly.
That. Yeah.
But they still had the 4 papers. They were longer papers, so they still had maths, English, verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, and then out of catchment would be an essay that a child would have to write, and that essay would only be used if there was a tie and there was only one place, and they had to decide between 2 children. Then that essay would be your final criterion. So they were still using 25% times 4, verbal reasoning, non-verbal reasoning, maths and English. So what CEM, but they were individual papers, and what CEM have done is they've basically combined into 2 papers all 4 subjects. The other difference was that with GL you had 69, 70, 80 questions, and you had an hour or whatever it was to do the paper, and you were basically just left to it. What CEM did was to apply greater pressure, realistically, if that's how it's translated, even if that's not what their initial intention was. They've split it into split each paper into sections, so you only have 10 minutes to do one section and then 5 minutes to do another section, and then they can adjust the timing depending on how difficult or easy each cohort finds it. So what we've found is over time, where each non-verbal question was generally allowed about 30 seconds a question when you average it out, it's now dropped to about 20.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, they haven't actually made the questions any more difficult. Again, I'm assuming they're working from a bank of questions.
It's just
additional.
More questions and less time.
Yes. So it's just delivered differently. But like you say, CEM was brought in because they said they wanted to make it tutor-proof and unteachable, and we'll bring in non-verbal and 3D and all of that. But I think, in my experience, certainly, I don't know what you two think, out between English and non-verbal for sure, I think that, or even verbal, I think that non-verbal is probably the more teachable of the 3.
It is, but I'd say like the thing that they're looking for, the thing that they're actually measuring is the speed with which a child can go through a process.
Right. So then if you think about when the 11 plus started, they weren't measuring speed initially. So the focus has changed. Yeah.
I think though the issue is there's different types of the problem is with the 11 plus for me has always been there's different types of intelligence.
Yes.
So
for sure,
what I'll find is a child can be very very
Emotionally
intelligent.
intelligent.
Or like intelligent in different ways, but perhaps the CEM test. I think the CEM test falls afoul of this the most because it is basically a speed test. That there's also slow intentional thinking, and
What explain?
so like most of your problems in life aren't a speed test.
No.
And that's what they're selecting for is speed. Yeah, I think actually considered decision and taking time
Yes.
deciding and reaching the right decision is a more important skill.
How do you test for that?
Yeah, that's
So
project-based learning. Well, a project-based test or something like that. Or
City of London brought that in. Whether they still do it, I don't know.
okay, so you've mentioned GL and CEM.
Okay, so there are two others that I know of. One is CSSC, which is the Consortium for Secondary Schools in Essex, and is based. The only one that's not part of that consortium is Chelmsford Girls, because they've opted to run their own tests and they use CEM style papers. All the others are part of the CSSE consortium.
Okay, and what's different about that exam
You want to take this?
compared to?
Do you want me
you've
to do
got. I mean, first of all, the sections aren't split into
No.
different timings, although guidance is given on the page where it says like you might like to spend this long on this section and that kind of thing. But that's like any exam paper. So I think it's a more familiar format, so it's more friendly to most children.
Yes.
I'd say most children, in my experience, dislike CEM over CSSE. Or
Yeah, and CSSE is easier for parents to get their head around as well.
yeah,
Yeah, very confusing.
it's easier for me to get my head around.
Well, do you remember
And-
our IT guy when we first introduced him to the CEM paper and said, "Look, this is what the format of the paper is, and this is what we're looking for." And he's a lawyer by profession, and he couldn't get his head around it. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he said you need a degree to understand all
Yes,
this.
that's right.
yeah.
And then CSSE also has
It's got
a writing task.
It's got writing tasks and
Two.
I think a lot is based on their core maths and English, and that's what they typically do in school. You haven't got as
Yes.
You have some non-verbal components in the maths paper, but not many though. Like it
it's
might
only
be
nets, isn't it?
it might
that
be
they-
something like nets that comes up, but I wouldn't preclude other things necessarily. It depends on the
Yeah, it could change
person
every
setting
year,
the
couldn't it?
test.
So the difference really is that a lot of that, the maths. No, in fact, I think both the maths and English are actually set by the schools themselves rather than get a board in to do it. The other and whereas the CEM and GL, that's the other interesting thing actually, they're multiple choice. And they're not multiple choice because children find it easier or harder. They're multiple choice because it means that
Computers can mark
the computers in the local council or wherever they are can mark them.
Yeah,
So
mark
even if
the
they get the
paper.
question right and don't mark the sheet in the correct way,
Yes.
is wrong.
Or if they
if
were
they
two or something.
or if they fill out, because a lot of people fill out the answers on the question sheet, and then attempt to transfer it all over at the end, which we tell them obviously not to do. But based on the fact that there's more questions than there is time to answer
Time.
them, you could fill out everything correctly, not put it on the answer sheet and get 0.
Well, in our mocks, we've had children where they've missed a question. So instead of marking question 5 against answer 5, they've done 4 or 6. And then so they're out by 1 all the way through, which means they get the whole thing wrong.
Common mistake that people do is they I don't know why they do this, but sometimes they get confused between antonyms and synonyms, and then they look for.
And do you know that's it? But do you know that's another trick that CEM uses. So they'll set synonyms, and then the next section will be antonyms. So because the child has just done synonyms, and when I've been proofing papers, our own papers,
I've done this.
I've made that mistake
Your
myself.
brain is in one mode and you've got to quickly switch it.
You've got to
another
be able
mode.
to switch it very quickly. It's this thing about speed again and being present in
That's
that.
why I'm terrible at that kind of thing, because it takes me a while to get.
Yes.
So like this type of test is just not my style.
Yes.
I'd much prefer to do like
Oh, I'm the other way around.
a long form paper with.
We spoke about this yesterday. You said it takes you a while to switch between
like
tasks, but for me, it's the other way around. Like I can switch between two different things in an instant.
Yeah, I'm slow. I need to get in the mood.
Yes, I
need to
must
get in the
admit,
mood. It's like before
I'm a
comprehension.
bit like that.
I know you're both.
We're
You're
very
both very
similar,
similar.
John and I.
So, what's involved in preparing, and like how difficult is it?
How long have you got?
Got about half an hour left.
Preparation. So the biggest mistake I think that a lot of parents make is we've dropped our child off to tuition. They're doing the 11 plus. That's it. We've done our bit. We're paying for it. And realistically, any tuition centre, any school can only provide the initial learning and guidance.
And materials.
If the practice doesn't happen at home, the child generally, not always, we've had a couple of children quite recently who didn't do too much work at home but still managed to pass, but they were just naturally that way. And I must admit, I personally, one of them, I wasn't too sure because he Mum would come in and take the work because he just couldn't be bothered to get up on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
I know exactly who you're talking about. Yeah. No, but he
passed because his mum.
His ability.
It was just he just because he had that style of thinking, and then he put the practice in at the end.
Yeah, because like you could teach him. You could teach. This is where intelligence comes into it, because like intelligence is how quickly you can pick something up, or typically like in terms of the IQ that they're looking for. So sometimes you teach a child, they need to be taught the same thing several different ways, and then they've got to be taught how to apply it in loads of different scenarios. Whereas like I'd say someone with natural ability, you can teach them something, they can instantly apply it to loads of scenarios because they figure out very quickly the heart of they get to they get to the heart of the problem quickly. That's what it's looking for.
Yes.
And then other people you need to
teach them the different ways that it turns up.
Like,
So to answer your question in what's involved in preparing, it isn't just about doing papers. And I think this is the trap that a lot of parents fall into. Do another paper, do another paper, do another paper. But what you want to see are incremental improvements.
It does, like I'd say with certain kids, you can go through a paper and then teach them each skill in it, and then they're very good at absorbing it. But then for the majority of children, what they need to do is they need to practice a topic until they acquire mastery of the topic.
Yeah, but if these people are doing a paper on their own at home, with no feedback, they're essentially learning and reinforcing the wrong way to do something.
Mistakes. Reinforcing your mistakes is... So people say you learn from your mistakes.
Yes.
But you don't learn from your mistakes. You learn from understanding your mistakes.
Yes.
And then...
Yeah,
not just making them.
Yes, exactly.
That is what they mean. They don't mean just make mistakes and then...
No, it is, but I feel like a lot of the time when you've got like an inspiring quote about mistakes...
Yes. It is about learning from them.
They just say, oh, you just make mistakes and then you'll learn from them. But that's just not true.
So
you've got to spend time to actually, like I always say to parents and stuff, like if a child does a test, you spend about twice as much time going through the mistakes as the test.
Absolutely.
Like especially those like mini tests.
So apart from tests, Well, like obviously tests, although they should be in the last 6 months or so leading up
Even less than that, I
leading
would
up
say.
to the exam.
Even less than
I
that.
think
But
like
before
they
that,
need to be
what's
they
in-
need to be tested on. So if they do a block of topics, then they need to be tested on those
Yeah,
those
yeah.
particular
To see-
topics.
see
Yeah,
if
so testing on that sort
Yeah.
of stuff is different to doing a full paper.
So
So I'm
with,
saying apart from doing a full paper, what?
so with the 11 plus, the criteria we are told is that there will be no question beyond key stage 2. Now,
What?
yes, I know.
That's
I
not true.
I know. Let me come to it. So, 2 things there. The exam takes place in the first term of year 6, and they're still learning topics in year 6, but there are end of year topics included in the exam, which we've come across several times.
Yes.
We've also come across the occasional question, more than occasional question, where it's well beyond key stage 2.
Yeah.
Is there a particular exam board where they appear more?
I would say probably CEM.
It depends how you interpret it, because like sometimes like a sequence question, there's sequences that they definitely do not do in school.
Well, they don't do nth term till year 7, although
But
this new curriculum has brought it into year 6.
when Fibonacci sequences,
They don't teach Fibonacci till...
but they
They do appear.
do appear.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, to what extent do you? I mean, I'd say that's something that they need to learn, because I didn't know about Fibonacci sequences until I was much older.
Yeah, but you didn't know like what it was called. Like children can figure stuff out. Like if you're talking about like what you said before, by taking one thing like teaching a sequence or whatever and being able to extrapolate that and put it into different situations, some children can see that plus that equals the next one. They don't necessarily need to know it's called a Fibonacci
Yes, but
sequence.
there needs to be like, I'd say the majority of them are taught it in their preparation.
Some people do get it though.
Yeah, there will be
Yeah.
children who will get it automatically, and I think you're right. I don't think that they need to know what it's called, because they're never going to
Yeah.
be asked what it's called.
They need to know how it works, though.
But they just need to know how
Yeah,
it works, and
but
I
they
think
can figure
that
that out.
they're
Some of
expecting
them
the
can.
children to figure out. Now that's quite a simple example, because I'm not saying Fibonacci sequence is simple. I'm saying that particular example is simple because it's a short sequence. And if children have been working with numerical sequences, if they've done enough of it, they should be able to pick up what the sequence is.
It depends how much they give you. If they only give you the first 2, 3, or 4,
No, I'd say sequences is something that kids struggle a lot with.
Yes, they do.
Because if they don't understand how it works, or
Yes,
they don't know
they do. They
especially geometric.
Yes.
So when they apply a multiplier to each, so if you start with 4 and then it goes to 2, especially halving, and then it goes to 1, and then you've got to figure out the next one.
But you see, a lot of that I personally think is technique, where they're simply doing it in their head, and that's just too much information to hold in your head. Particularly when you're working at speed.
yeah, it's technique rather than existing knowledge.
But generally in school they've encountered arithmetic sequences.
Yes,
So
rather
they
than geometrical
yeah,
ones.
so they go up by a common
Yes.
difference, or go down by a common difference. So those ones they tend to get correct because they've encountered it enough.
Yes.
But then if they haven't seen enough sequences or types of sequences, which is generally true if they haven't done tuition or something like that, then how can you expect them to understand it?
Yes. I mean, there is always that aspect of it.
Yeah.
I think the key thing for preparing for this is this is how we work, so I'm going to say this, is understanding the topic and learning how to apply that topic to a given problem. Because that goes well beyond the 11 plus. That will see them through all the way through their education system if they follow it through. what it will also do is give them the confidence that they can tackle almost anything.
I think one
you
of the
teach
best,
them to teach themselves. You teach them to learn, actively learn on their own.
Yes, become independent
I
learners.
think one of the best things is what it does for their literacy in a lot of cases.
Yes.
Preparing, because they realize, well, parents start to realize that their child's literacy, although it may be good in school, so they might be top of their school in or their year in terms of their literacy in school and the books they're reading, that kind of thing. But because the 11 plus pushes them out of their comfort zone, and they have to read these antiquated texts. So a lot of the time they're selecting like sometimes Dickens and stuff like that, which is very difficult. They're forced to be pushed out of their comfort zone in terms of reading, and they encounter expressions and words and things like that and uses of language that they're not used to. And I think that really pushes their ability.
Yes.
So even with the brightest students, they're not necessarily used to that level of literacy. So I think that for me is one of the most valuable things.
Yes.
Is what it does for their comprehension.
Yes.
And a child's reading's the most important thing.
Yeah, and expanding the vocabulary, which then goes into verbal reasoning and into eventually their writing when they do their SATs and when they do their English GCSEs and all the rest of it. I don't know whether it's because schools don't have enough time or whether
I think
it's how things are taught. But, we get children who are preparing for GCSE who've forgotten how to use semicolons.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got to reteach all of that. But
and things like clauses and different types of clauses
that's
and
it.
different
And go
types of
back
sentences
to
and stuff
sentence
like that.
structure.
Yeah. Sometimes you end up teaching, year 6 grammar.
End up doing that again.
Because like they're dealing with like structural components and stuff like that, and then they need to picking out parts of speech and stuff like that. And they've got to go back to their primary school knowledge in a way that they've forgotten.
Yeah, and it I think part of the 11 plus, I think, reinforces it a lot more than within children who have worked on the 11 plus than those who haven't. And I think it has long-term benefits.
I think the preparation process is
grueling.
Yeah, so can we explain, because
hard.
that was the original question. What's involved in preparing? We haven't covered that. What we've covered general.
Well, we can talk about how we do it, because not every tutor or teacher or parent where they're working at home will do it in the same way. But generally, the preparation is that you have to know all of the topics in Key Stage 2 in maths and English right up to the end of Year 6. That's the first thing. You need to be able to apply those topics. So, area of a compound shape, for example.
So a surface understanding of the topic is not enough.
No.
Basically.
No, knowledge is
it
not enough.
for sure is not enough.
For instance, area of a triangle.
Yes.
There was a question that basically caught everyone out recently, and we had an assessment recently, and it had the area of the triangle, and it had the height of the triangle, and they had to find the width of the triangle. So the height was included, and then the area was there. But if you don't understand, or if you can't, if you remember, in order to find that, you'd have to. So in order to find the area of a triangle, you've got to multiply the width by the perpendicular height and then halve it.
Yes. And it's the halving they forget.
And then they forget to multiply. Yeah.
They've got to work backwards.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they have to multiply rather than halve.
So
I must admit, I looked at that question because it was quite recent, wasn't it? I looked at that question, and I think I even put a note in to our system to say this is too difficult for them.
Yeah.
But they do ask that type of.
Yes, they do.
They ask that type of question that tests their deep understanding of the topic.
Yes.
So
So knowledge is not enough, we're saying, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is definitely not enough, and particularly if you're sitting CEM and you've got to work the speed, you've got to have come across enough of these problems to be able to recall your memory to say, oh yeah, I've seen this before and I know what to do.
Right. So this is one thing where people go wrong quite a lot. They jump straight into papers and try and get the exam technique and the exposure to the stuff done too early. And we're
Wait.
saying get the knowledge done first, get your foundational knowledge sorted, experience these questions in different situations, and then start repeating papers once you're aware of.
But parents really panic about this, and we had it last year where we had few parents who were just panicked about, oh, they haven't had enough exam practice, they've not had enough exam practice. But, we were in the
But
middle
the thing is, if you test too early, you'll just freak them out.
Yeah.
Freak the children out. They'll be like, oh no, I don't know anything.
We saw that with these children, that they were just focused on their timing rather than the actual content.
Yeah, so you've got to get the content done
And
first.
so the preparation is not just you've got to know the topic. So the first step is you've got to know the topic. The second step is I'll have a look, but I think I've put a list of topics. Obviously, it's not
I think they are
exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list, but I think it covers sort of 95% of the topics. I think I've put it on our website as a free resource.
Free download. We'll leave a link.
Yeah.
And we've also got downloadable mock exams and things like that you can do. Just make sure you get the knowledge first before you start doing all the papers.
Yeah.
So the first thing is having the knowledge. The second thing is being able to apply that knowledge. The third thing is then looking at timing
An exam technique.
and exam technique.
So
And then finally, and this is, I would say, such an important step just before the exam, actually going through and looking where your weak areas are and focusing on those weak areas and trying to shore them up. It's like building a battlement, I guess. You want to make sure that all the walls are secure.
That's where tests come into it, and that's probably testing's main point, or it should be testing's main point. It's not just the score isn't the most important thing. The important thing is why did they
until
get
the exam?
Why did they get a question wrong?
Yeah.
Is it born out? Or is it a silly mistake? Is it an avoidable mistake, or is it like a fundamental issue in terms of the
concept? Where
concept?
They haven't understood the concept. Yes.
Yeah. Same with anything. If you're making something, if you're designing something, you'd test once you've made it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to test before it's already there.
Well, yeah. You've got to build the foundation.
Testing comes at the end.
And then
in terms of verbal and non-verbal preparation, schools don't teach it.
no.
Most schools don't teach it, no.
I don't know any schools that teach
I've heard
it.
no, some people some do now.
Do they?
Some of those prep schools.
Yeah, the prep
They
Oh, the
do.
prep schools do. I was thinking more state schools.
No, state,
they
Oh, yeah,
don't.
yeah. Prep schools will.
Some state schools where I feel like the teacher usually has, or the headmaster of the school or the headmistress of the school has an insight into the exam, or wants more people to go from the state school, has some kind of agenda there. Then they may push extra sessions to
if they're trying to
help
filter their students into a particular school from that school to that.
But most heads and most schools are against the 11 plus, so we don't see this. So the way to do it is either go to a tutor or buy. There are plenty of books available, and ours. I think there are some others. I'm not 100% sure. There must be. I think there is a Bond one, but our ones teach them the techniques.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean that's why we
how
made
to
them.
answer a question. So our books we made to help parents teach their children.
Yeah. So a bit of a silly question: is it difficult? Is the 11 plus difficult, in your opinion, for someone that is year 5, year 6?
Yes,
age
I
10.
I think it's very difficult. Yeah. Obviously, like you get variation.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know one child who would say it was easy in terms of preparing for it.
No.
Even the ones who are like top top level.
Yeah. So
Well,
it's not for everyone, and it shouldn't be for everyone.
No, it shouldn't be for everyone. You know your own child, and you know whether one they can handle the pressure. Because remember that it's not just the pressure of the 11 plus. Once they get into a grammar school, the pressure is ongoing, and the majority of children who get into grammar school then carry on tuition.
I think the thing is, if you just make it in to one of these schools, when you get into these schools, you're at the bottom because
Yes.
everyone else is. But if you are, we found that people that just miss out and go to a different school are
Do
at the
better.
top,
State school,
and they're
yeah.
at the top.
I think
And
there
they
was,
do generally do quite well.
they actually there was a study and actually they followed kids who had just missed out and those who just got in, and the ones who missed out actually did better at GCSE.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think confidence is a massive factor
Yes.
in how a
But
child
also-
performs in an exam.
Also, it's the study skills that have been instilled, during the 11 plus. It's something when you're preparing for the 11 plus, it's not, oh, it's Saturday, so we need to go to tuition and then that's it. You need to be doing something every single day, even if you're playing a game about adjectives or capital cities or countries or.
So yeah, what we tend to say is that they're here for 3 hours a week, roughly, which is less than 150 hours a year. The other, however many hundreds and thousands of hours, they're not here. They're at school or they're at home. So it does practice, and that needs to take place not just when you're in here. It needs to take place throughout the week.
Yes.
So consistency.
Is
Well,
key.
How important would you say consistency is for
Very,
11 plus?
very.
Oh, very important with any preparation towards a
And-
goal.
and- right, and there's a
consistency
reason
is-
for that, because when you learn your times tables, and I've given this example like a million times, when you're learning your times tables, you're learning them by rote mostly. So I was teaching year one yesterday, and we were doing two times tables, and one child just did not get it. Didn't get it. And then eventually I showed him 2 or 3 different ways of doing it. And then eventually the penny dropped and he said, "Oh, it's doubling." And then he was fine.
Okay.
Now, when you're learning times tables, obviously that technique you're taught. But after that, to remember your times tables is done by rote. And it goes into your short-term memory, but because you practice it so much, it then ends up in your long-term memory. And that's why consistency is important, because if you've been like that example that you were talking about with the area with the triangle, that question, if you do that question once, if you don't have a good memory, because remember, children are learning so many different things.
Yeah.
They're being exposed to so many different things for this exam. You do that question just once, generally it won't be enough.
No.
So if you came across that in your exam, you may remember, or the child should remember that they've come across it before, but they may not necessarily remember how to answer that question. And so absolutely important is consistency of practice. And preparing for the 11 plus doesn't always have to be pen and paper. So, going shopping with a child, for example, and testing their mental arithmetic skills,
Yeah.
which is so foundational.
You're adding decimals, you're dealing with money, you're finding the change. There's a lot of skills there.
So if you're going on holiday, doing conversions, if you're traveling, looking at timetables and asking questions on them and saying, well, what if this train was 10 minutes later, do you think we're going to get there 10? And actually getting the children to think about things.
You know, we were doing timetables
Yes.
recently,
Yes.
and everyone, not even like bar none, got confused by bus timetables because they
Because they don't look at them.
don't take the bus. So
Well, no, but even when they do take the bus, if
they
you
don't look at them. Yeah.
well, they've got these new boards, haven't they? These electronic things. Your bus will be here in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
They don't really have to think about it.
But yeah, like they give how you've got a range of
layout.
time. Yeah, the layout
It's
is
7 minutes past 6, and then every hour. Then they've got to figure out when, like the 1 o'clock. 7 minutes past 1 bus is going to. They've never seen that before.
yeah.
Where it says on the hour, every hour, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's
Every
new.
30 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got confused.
And then there's the section that had Monday to Friday, and then Saturday different times, Sunday no bus. I'm like
But
trying
you
to figure out what to
even,
look
even
at.
10 years ago, children would have been stronger at that than they are now. There's definitely a shift in children's thinking now, whether that's to do with the lockdowns, etc. I don't know.
No, it's technology.
and,
said
and that was the other thing is
Yeah.
technology.
better technology.
it's like
makes-
map reading.
Better
Yeah.
technology makes stupider people.
Yes.
Which is same for me. Like I could read maps and I could do like
Yeah, if I force myself to read a map,
Yeah,
I can. But
I could drive without having to
I remember
look anything up. But now I actually look at Google or whatever it is for
I
most
remem-
of my journeys.
I remember, like, because we were reading maps when we were 11 on geography trips and that kind of thing, and like it made sense then, but then it probably makes even less sense now because
Yes.
I haven't done it for so long. That
And now imagine a child who's never seen it
yeah,
and putting them in that situation and them having to. So
a big part of the preparation, I think, is actually give. This is the hardest thing, I think, actually, for a parent, is giving your child rich experiences
yes,
and
Getting involved.
getting them into things that. Well, for instance, going to the museum,
but
going on
even
holiday.
even beyond that, like, okay, I took my child to the Natural History Museum. What did you see? Oh, just
a
saw
bear.
Yeah. There's no. It's that interaction.
Yeah.
You need to provoke thought.
Yes, it's that interaction and getting the child to actually look at things differently and think about things that goes a long way. And it's all preparation. It doesn't have to be pen and paper all the time. Obviously, pen and paper is important
Yeah.
because that's what the exam will be.
There are some. So, I don't know if you've done Wordle.
Yes,
recently.
we do it all the time.
Like, and what I like about that game and things like that is it's a fun thing that gets them excited about words,
Yes,
and in a way that they wouldn't. So actually, like things like board games and stuff like that, junior articulate, and those things are really, really good to do at home as a family.
Boggle. We used to do Boggle as well.
we spent hours on Boggle.
Yeah, it's got a competitive side to it.
It's got a time limit.
It's got learning, and it's also something you can do with the family. So it's bonding. So those types of experiences could, if you're thinking about or you're trying to work out what your child is missing in terms of 11 plus, it could be that.
Yes,
Because you can spend all your time learning topics, but you don't bring them to life that way. It's only when you apply it to something interesting, like actually going to a museum, learning history, or going to, I don't know, playing a word game and discovering new words, where you'd actually, bring the knowledge to life.
Yeah, it's exposing them to this sort of stuff in a fun way
Yeah.
to actually make them actively interested in it rather than just here's a paper and.
Because children generally people need incentives
yes,
to do
for
things.
sure.
So
But even at a more basic level, we talked about this before, where I'm again wrecking my memory. Something to do with chicken, wasn't it? That they thought chickens came from lambs or something. What was it? Do you remember this?
No. Because it's
Yeah,
not.
we had.
It wasn't a dream, was it?
I've
No,
had,
no, no. it wasn't
I've
a
had
dream.
people say, was it an apple comes from Tesco's, not from a tree?
because
Well, I
because
mean,
they've never-
I guess they're right.
They are right. No, we had this with they thought chicken was made from. I can't remember now, but
It
you
sounds
know,
ridiculous, whatever it was.
Yeah, it was, and it. I think it took the tutor back somewhat to think. Hang on a minute,
Yeah.
what's going on
No,
here?
every single week something takes me back. Like when they didn't know what cello was.
Yes.
No, what's a cello?
Yes,
I'm like, what? You haven't. So it's like
but it's never mind cello. A lot of them don't know what a violin is.
true. Yeah, I had that the other day.
Yeah.
So
So it's that exposure is particularly for verbal reasoning very important.
and it's hard to say to a parent exactly how to improve vocabulary, because vocabulary is what you use on an everyday basis and
And if
what you're
parents
exposed
aren't
to.
using it, then
If they don't have a rich enough level of experience in a particular area, then they're not going to. It's
So-
not going to feel visceral to them. They're not going to.
yeah.
It's not going to feel real to them.
I mean, another way of doing that is to introduce a set number of new words every week.
Mm.
You know, several ways of doing it. For example, just randomly opening a dictionary.
I think that has its place, especially for more weird vocabulary items.
Yes.
But then something like a cello is best like the best way to learn what a cello is to actually see a cello and play around
Hear
with
it,
the
yeah.
cello or hear it. So in those
Well-
cases you kind of go, well, there's a limit to what you can learn from like flashcards or dictionaries
Yes.
and that kind of thing. You've
But
got to
by the same
experience it.
token, there's a limit to how many instruments, for example, because that's what we're talking about. A child can play about with and touch, etc. Yes, sure, you could go into a music shop, one that sells all these instruments, etc. But just as easily would be to watch an orchestra play, even on telly, and talk about the different instruments.
Every phone, Mac, iPad, or whatever has GarageBand on it, which is what we're using to record now. And you can literally just choose an instrument and
But
start
then
playing it on the
the
screen. You can see
difficulty
it, you
is-
can hear it. That's in everybody's hands.
But the difficulty with that is obviously these devices content competes for time,
Yes.
and a child could spend, I think a child could spend part of their day looking at diverse content, but the fact is that they won't. They spend their time, looking at maybe something a bit
Obscure.
obscure and
yes.
well, not just obscure,
Well, I
just
think
like maybe not that beneficial.
But then that is in the parent's control, isn't it? So so it's up to the parent to guide.
Yeah, within. I understand, like some parents have demands on their time,
All parents have demands on their time. There are none that
Yeah.
don't.
so
But that's just part of it. It's part of bringing up your child and giving them what they need, particularly if you want them to go down that grammar school route or the independent school route. Then you just have to put in the work. It's that simple.
yeah, I think there's no easy way about it.
There is no easy way. All a tutor can do is help as much as they can within the time frame and then guide the parent to say, well, we've noticed X, Y, and Z, and this is what we think you should do. Beyond that,
10%.
beyond that, it's up to the parent.
I mean, something that how remember in the nursery podcast we were talking about how there's Montessori and using the
Yes.
child's interests to
Yes.
sort of push their learning in different ways.
Yeah, you could go
Like,
down that road.
There's also some problems can be solved by going down that route. So if you want your child to learn, say your child loves football, quite a common thing with boys. They love football, and they're just mad about football. then maybe like you can enrich their experience somewhat, and they can learn some words by reading a history of the World Cup, and or something like that. Like, because it will probably expose them to a lot of words that they're not used to.
The two siblings in Loughton,
Which one?
mad about
Oh
football.
yeah.
Year 1 and year
Oh
3.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll leave it there for today.
Yeah. That was quite interesting.